Institute for Research and Education, and for the Brain Research International Data Governance and Exchange, or BRIDGE project, and a member of the OHBM DIC 2022 to 2026. And her main interests are structural MRI, cortical folding, and structural biomarkers. I would like to stop my sharing now, and please, Fernanda.
Thank you, Guillermo.
Start.
Okay. Okay, can you see in presentation mode in a few seconds, I hope? Okay, so
yes.
are you seeing presentation mode? Okay, that's perfect. So hello everyone, my name is Fernanda. I really would like to thank the MRITogether organization for inviting me for this talk, and I hope I can provide some, at least insights of what is the life of a user in open science. And I'm doing a postdoc at IDOR, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And I'm here to talk a bit about my project, connecting theoretical models to the brain, and more than that, how this project led me to a global data sharing initiative. And the outline of this presentation, I just want to briefly introduce the research question so you can understand how we needed open data to answer this question and how we used some open data and open science to try to solve the problem. I wouldn't say my project succeeded, but I think it's on the way to it. I hope so, because it kind of getting expanded and we started needing more kinds of open science and open data to manage it. So I also want to talk about when I had my turn, my revelation that, okay, now it's my turn to share neuroimaging data and how I can contribute to this ecosystem. And finally, I want to introduce the BRIDGE project, which is the Brain Research International Data Governance and Exchange. So I work with structural MRI, more specifically cortical folding. And I think this is very cool because we can follow a lot of paths from it. For example, methods development, that is a kind of a core for open science because you need to share your method, you need to share your pipeline, but you also need to validate this method using open data with and then people can reproduce this validation, or people can reproduce with, or people can validate with their own data and so on. It's like a cycle of validations and reproducing, which I really enjoy. And also we can work, for example, my goal was to optimize cortical measurements for morphological studies if we're using MRI. And from that, you can start to suggest a new biomarker for pathologies. And also there's a need for a lot of data because you need to, again, validate this biomarker, make it reproducible for a lot of communities and populations. And further, and last but not least, you can also produce some basic science and try to fill some gaps in the theory of development. And again, you need data for it because you cannot only do a study case to fulfill a theoretical gap. But more than that, I will say this a lot during this presentation, we need diverse data. We cannot only have data from the US or from Europe, from generally the global north. We also need to include data from other not so from not so represented places. And by cortical folding itself, it can be measured and named in multiple ways. You might be familiar with the gyrification index and the local gyrification index, but it can also be measured by the fractal dimensionality, which measure the fractal aspects of the brain. And my question is more focused on the theoretical axonal tension variable that was formulated by Mota and Herculano Rosell in 2015 and expanded by Young in 2021. So what Mota and Herculano Rosell did in 2015 was to propose a universal law of cortical folding for mammals that was based on the surface area of the brain and the cortical thickness. And for the lay audience, they did something really cool, which was to extrapolate this to paper balls. So a paper ball folds like the brain, and if you have a thicker a paper, you have a less folded paper ball, and if you have a thinner paper ball, you have a more folded paper ball, and if you have a bigger surface area of the paper, you have a bigger paper ball, and so on. But not only this, they provided evidence from MRIs, and they included 78 mammal species, and they got like a very high correlation for the variables they proposed in the model. But there is a limitation on this because they only provided data for 1 or 2 subjects of each species. So in 2021, Wang proposed some independent components from human brain morphology. Please don't focus on the physics and the maths here, but what I want you to understand from that is that this probably establishes a geometry constraint to living mammal brains. And it could help us to differentiate health and disease in the human brain. But again, we needed more data to test this hypothesis. So what we did was to, in my case, test this with Alzheimer's disease, because Alzheimer's disease, there is a very visible neurodegeneration, so we know it's occurring. And here I put some examples. There's an MRI from a healthy control and AD patient in the same age range, and you can see how the cortex is thinner in some areas and how the sulci are enlarged. I'm going to put this example here. Okay, so how the sulci are enlarged, the ventricles also are enlarged. So the neurodegeneration is visible and is factable. And okay, so now we show that there is differences between cortical folding with health people and the AG and AD patients and so on. We also correlated with some cognition and CSF markers. But our study had only 121 subjects, and the reason why is that's because we use it in cohort from IDOR. And this is very cool because, again, we are trying to help to increase the diversity of the data, but of course, the number of subjects is reduced by financial limitations, time, staff, and so on. And also, it provided a limitation because we are studying aging. So we had, for example, in this slope analysis that now we call it the scaling factor of the brain that is closely related to a fractal dimensionality, we had, it was supposed to be by the theory 1.25, and our data didn't match as well, but we had just a limited age range here. So it was the first time that we thought, okay, we need more data, and how can we find more data to do this? And this was in like 2016, 2017. I was a PhD in Brazil, didn't know much about open science, so I started to look on my own. And since we needed more data to support the extrapolations, I started to looking for similar data sets from ours in terms of MRI equipment, because you must be aware that combining MRI data from different sites is not straightforward because there is differences in the images. Even if you scan the same person in the same equipment, you twice in a row, you will not have the same image, and even less the same result from a processing pipeline. So we try to reduce this uncertainty by looking for data sets with the same MRI equipment to try to reduce this. And we did it. We found 2 data sets from Amsterdam. The other one was from a 7 Tesla, so we did not combine with the AOMIC and IDOR data. And I say combine in a very straightforward way, not doing any harmonizations. I will get to that. And then we could help to give a direction of what should be the answer to our result, even though it was not 100% reliable because we were doing any treatment on this data to combine them. And we could, for the first time, draft what would be the typical behavior of these cortical folding variables in a healthy subjects during lifespan. And it was very cool because these variables were new. So to study aging, and pathologies that happens during the aging, we should have what a normal aging looks like. And we could try to provide that for the first time just with 2 data sets. But we wanted to go further. So we expanded this work, now combining 9 data sets. Again, I was just a PhD trying to find my own path on this open science data. And what we proposed was a simple harmonization procedure that combined this data, because again, it's not simple to do it. You have a lot of barriers to combine MRI data. And we could, for the first time, produce normative modeling for cortical folding for these cortical folding variables using open data. And we also include some IDAR data to expand the comparison of the trajectories of controls and HDs. And we could try to fill a bit of the gaps on how the transition from control to HD happens. But then at the end of this, I was like, okay, so how can I share the data? How do I share proper the pipeline that I use to do the harmonization? Can I share the results from the data that I download from the internet? I was a bit lost on that. And this started me with this curiosity on how can I contribute. And at the same time, IDOR was joining the Bridge project that I will talk a bit more. But in parallel, we had a second problem, just another example in practice, how you can use open data. So in my postdoc, we tried to now see development and pathologies that happens in development and congenital pathologies, congenital malformations. That was the Zika congenital syndrome that in extreme cases, the baby born with microcephaly, including a lot of other alterations in the brain, and the corpus callosum digenesis, with which the person born without the corpus callosum or just a part of it. And we intended to use these extreme radiological scenarios to use as evidence for the theory development of cortical folding. But then, again, we needed the data, we needed open science, because we do not have enough neonatal control scannings, because it's hard to scan babies. So having this data accessible would be great at the time. It wasn't very easy to get the data at the time. And then when we got access, it was a bit hard to process this data. So we also needed and still need some open, reliable, and reproducible processing pipelines. And okay, so we thought, okay, let's try to make our own solution. For example, a segmentation pipeline that segmentates these extreme radiological scenarios that I showed you. But again, we would need open data to validate these methods. So now, and how can we go further on this with all these problems that I showed to you? Repeating, we need to improve data diversity, because, for example, for the Alzheimer's disease more normative modeling, we still rely a lot in the data from the global north. So we still need to provide more data from not so representative countries, and including not so representative methods. I was so glad Guillermo said that he works with low field MRI, because a lot of places only have low field MRI. So how can we include these methods on research, or not, at least to make the normative models good for them as well? And as I said, there might be some concerns when you share the data, but on the same side, the funding agencies and the journals are increasingly requesting for open science approaches. Then you need to share your code, you need to share your results, at least you need to share the data, and how to work around this, but still keeping the ethical, the legislation concerns, right? So the Bridge came up with this question. So how can we help researchers to have access to good practice, legislation, technical issues and solutions, and the ethical guidelines to share the neuroimaging and neuroscientific data in a proper manner, but also considering the needs of the person with lived experience, that at the end is the people that we want to help. We want to give them a better life. We want to provide them solutions, medications, treatments, or help this treatment development, understand the disease better, and so on. So when I joined Bridge, was amazing, because now I can try to actually help on providing the solution from Latin America. So the Bridge is a project funded by Wellcome Trust, is a Brain Research International Data Governance and Exchange project. And what we want to help is to reduce this burden faced by the research and the people with lived experience on this due to these barriers of data sharing and data management. And we want to do it globally, how to share data from Latin America to the US, to Africa, to Europe, and so on. And Bridge does this on identifying issues in data governance, gather information, do some community engagement, and then after disseminates the knowledge that we gather and compilate it in an easy way for the researchers. And the approach of Bridge is a holistic approach, so trying to join forces from research, ethics, legal, technological, and PWL. And this is led by Franco Pastilli, UT, and Austin, but we also have PIs from each region. Fernanda is the PI from Latin America. And in each region, you have a PWL ambassador, an ethics ambassador, a legal ambassador, and a technological ambassador that will bring the perspective of their knowledge expertise. We also have an advisory board to try to tailor the solutions and the questions that we are facing. And this is the Bridge Latin America team. Fernanda Tovar, the PI, I'm the postdoc, and all the ambassadors and scientific advisors. So just some take-home messages. We need more diverse data, and we need to work around to make this feasible for the researchers to share more data from the Global South, more specifically. But at the same time, we need to be aware that there are limitations in combining data from different sites. And I thank a lot the open science community because they day-to-day basis, they are working and validating methods of harmonization MRI images. And keep in mind that Bridge is working on trying to produce material to help researchers to share, manage their data in a proper manner, respecting the local aspects, because we are doing this in a local scenario, for example, Brazil and in the context of Latin America and how Latin America has similar issues and what are the particulars of each country, but also from a global perspective on trying to have a homogeneous guideline for everyone. And I want to thank you a lot for the invitation again and for your time. If you want to know more about what the Bridge Latin America team is doing, please go in this QR code. But if you are a tech person, I will be very, very happy if you could contribute to our data sharing survey, because we are still gathering information of what kind of barrier the tech people are facing on sharing the data. So thank you again. This is my email, and please reach me out if you want to contribute.